Now, it is truly an honor for me to introduce our honored guest today. He doesn't need a very long introduction. We all know who he is. But Andy Weir attended Livermore High School in the 80s. Both his father and stepmother worked at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Andy was first hired as a programmer for Sandia National Laboratory at age 15 and has been working as a software engineer ever since. In February 2014, The Martian was released in hardcover in both the US and 19 countries worldwide, debuting on the New York Times bestseller list. The paperback edition just came out weeks ago. If you go on IMDb, you will see that The Martian will be a major motion picture set to be released in November of next year, directed by Ridley Scott and starring Matt Damon as Mark Watney. Okay, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Andy Weir.
Thanks, everybody. I do a lot of these events now. I go around, I talk about the book. Let me see if I can get this. Yes. I talk about the book a lot, but this one is particularly special to me because this is my hometown. This is where I grew up, and about, I don't know, I'd say a third of the people in the audience are people I personally know. Parents, relations, old friends, relations of old friends. It's pretty cool. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how The Martian came to be. I initially wrote The Martian as a serial story that I posted to my website, one chapter at a time. I had no intention of ever making it into a book, or I didn't even have a daydream that it would get published by a traditional publisher or anything like that. I wrote it one chapter at a time, and I posted it to my website. I had a fairly loyal group of readers, maybe a couple of thousand people, who had accumulated over 10 years of writing short fiction. I just had a mailing list. You could sign up for my mailing list and get emailed when I posted something new. So as I posted The Martian chapter by chapter, that was just another set of stories I was posting. I didn't think it was anything particularly significant. And what was cool is, those of you who've read it know that I put a lot of effort into trying to make it as technically accurate as possible. And that was really helpful posting it in serial format because my readers are nerds and they would point out everything that was wrong. So it went through a pretty heavy vetting process. And so it wasn't just me by myself. Lots of people, there's nothing a nerd loves more than checking the math. And so that was very helpful. Then when I finished it, it was done. I figured, okay, on to my next story, no big deal. But people started emailing me and saying, hey, I love reading this serial, not your other stuff, but this serial I like, and I hate reading it in a web page. Is there any way that we can have this in some other, like an e-reader format? So I figured out how to do that, and I posted it in e-reader format to my website. And I'm like, okay, now you can read it for free, on a website, or read it for free by downloading this e-reader thing and putting it on your e-reader. Then I got other emails from people saying, yeah, I want to download the e-reader format, but I'm not very technically savvy. I don't know how to download a file from the internet and put it on my e-reader. There's a lot of people who fall into that category. And so they said, can you just post it to Kindle so that I can buy it by pushing a button on my e-reader and call it a day? So I figured out how to do that. And the way that works is pretty simple. You don't need to do any personal outlay of cash or anything like that. It's just that Amazon gets a percentage of your money. Amazon owns Kindle. But they're not a charity. They're not interested in just being a free data hosting service, so you have to charge at least 99 cents. So I set the price to 99 cents and said, all right, everybody, you can read it for free on my website, or you can download the e-reader version, for free here, or you can pay $1 to have Amazon put it on your Kindle for you, basically. And more people bought it than downloaded it for free. Which goes to show two things. One, that Amazon has a pretty deep reach into the readership market, and two, I didn't have that many regular readers at my website. It got around by word of mouth, and it got good reviews on Amazon, and so more and more people bought it, and they recommended it to each other. And then it eventually got into the top sellers list in Amazon. Once it got into the top sellers list at Amazon, then it really started to take off in sales because, of course, someone's like, oh, I feel like I want a science fiction book. What are the top sellers in science fiction? So it dramatically increases your odds of random purchases, right? So that attracted the attention of Crown Publishing, which is a part of Random House. And they had a book scout there who recommended it to an editor named Julian Pavia. And Julian read it, and he liked it a lot. And he said, like, okay, I want to offer this guy a print deal, but I want to run it by a colleague of mine first. And so he ran it by a colleague of his named David Fugate, who is a literary agent, and said, somebody completely outside of Random House. Julian said, like, I don't want anybody. I want a complete, fresh view of it. Give me your opinion. So David read it, and he said, I like it. And then he turned around and became my agent. And then he said, okay, Julian, let's talk about how much you're going to pay for it. Although, to be fair, I tell it like it's some predatory story, but realistically, that's what Julian expected. He said, like, I'm going to be offering this guy a print deal. He could probably, he should have an agent. So it was really ethics, but I like to tell it that way. So out of nowhere, while I'm just minding my own business, being a computer programmer, working on my next unrelated story to The Martian, I get an email from a respected literary agent saying, like, hey, do you want an agent? Now, a little bit of backstory. In my late 20s, I came into some money from getting laid off from AOL at a convenient time. I had a bunch of stock options. I got laid off of AOL, and they said, okay, now that you've been laid off, you have 30 days to sell these or you lose them. So I was forced to sell them when the stock was at its peak. So I assure you I would not have made a wise financial decision left to my own devices, but I was forced into this. And so I had enough money, and I took 3 years off to try to write. This is in the late 90s. And I wrote a book, and it was okay. It wasn't that good. I tried to get an agent. I couldn't. Tried to get publishers to look at it. I couldn't. It's the typical story of trying to break into the industry. And I gave up and went back to computer programming. So I couldn't get an agent. For 3 years, I was sending out, hey, be my agent. And they're like, hey, no. And so to have an agent come to me was pretty surprising. And I'm like, I looked him up to make sure he's like a real literary agent, not some weird thing. And I'm like, yes. He's like, okay, good. Random House wants to publish your book. I'm like, okay, yes. And he's like, and then 4 days later, 20th Century Fox came and said, we want to buy the movie rights. Okay. So that was an eventful week. I had to take a day off of work because I was just, And it was really weird because I'm at work and I'm like, I'm trying to figure out why it's crashing and something like that. Oh, I need to take a few minutes off to work on my movie deal. Okay, I'm going to come back and work on this a little bit more. So anyway, then they did print it. It sold really well, and then I was able to quit my day job in April this year, and I'm going to go full-time on the writing. So that's the story there. So I'm going to do a reading now, and I'm going to read chapter 1. So there's kids in the audience, so I'm going to substitute the swear words. There are profanities in here, but I'm going to use PG equivalents. So I'm just going to fight the microphone here, actually. Test. All right. I don't know. I have to be pretty close to this for it to work. How about something like this? Okay. You can infer what the profanities are. I'm pretty much screwed. That's my considered opinion. Screwed. 6 days into what should be the greatest month of my life, and it's turned into a nightmare. I don't even know who will read this. I guess someone will find it eventually, maybe 100 years from now. For the record, I didn't die on Sol 6. Certainly the rest of the crew thought I did, and I can't blame them. Maybe there'll be a day of national mourning for me, and my Wikipedia page will say Mark Watney is the only human being to have died on Mars. And it'll be right, probably, because I'll surely die here, just not on Sol 6 when everyone thinks I did. Let's see, where do I begin? The Ares program. Mankind reaching out to Mars to send people to another planet for the very first time and expand the horizons of humanity, blah, blah, blah. The Ares 1 crew did their thing and came back heroes. They got the parades and fame and love of the world. Ares 2 did the same thing in a different location on Mars. They got a firm handshake and a hot cup of coffee when they came home. Ares 3, well, that was my mission. Okay, not mine per se. Commander Lewis was in charge. I was just one of her crew. Actually, I was the very lowest ranked member of the crew. I would only be in command of the mission if I were the only remaining person. Hey, what do you know? I'm in command. I wonder if this log will be recovered before the rest of the crew die of old age. I presume they got back to Earth all right. Guys, if you're reading this, it wasn't your fault. You did what you had to do. In your position, I would have done the same thing. I don't blame you, and I'm glad you survived. I guess I should explain how Mars missions work for any layman who may be reading this. We got to Earth orbit the normal way, through an ordinary ship to Hermes. All the Ares missions use Hermes to get to and from Mars. It's really big and costs a lot, so NASA only built one. Once we got to Hermes, 4 additional unmanned missions brought us fuel and supplies while we prepared for our trip. Once everything was a go, we set out for Mars, but not very fast. Gone are the days of heavy chemical fuel burns and trans-Mars injection orbits. Hermes is powered by ion engines. They throw argon out the back of the ship really fast to get a tiny amount of acceleration. The thing is, it doesn't take much reactant mass, so a little argon and a nuclear reactor to power things let us accelerate constantly the whole way there. You'd be amazed at how fast you can get going with a tiny acceleration over a long time. I could regale you with tales of how we had great fun on the trip, but I won't. I don't feel like reliving it right now. Suffice it to say, we got to Mars 124 days later without strangling each other. From there, we took the MDV, Mars Descent Vehicle, to the surface. The MDV is basically a big can with some light thrusters and parachutes attached. Its sole purpose is to get 6 humans from Mars orbit to the surface without killing any of them. And now we come to the real trick of Mars exploration, having all of your crap there in advance. A total of 14 unmanned missions deposited everything we would need for surface operations. They tried their best to land all the supply vessels in the same general area and did a reasonably good job. Supplies aren't nearly so fragile as humans and can hit the ground really hard, but they tend to bounce around a lot. Naturally, they didn't send us to Mars until they confirmed that all the supplies had made it to the surface and their containers weren't breached. Start to finish, including supply missions, a Mars mission takes about 3 years. In fact, there were Ares 3 supplies en route to Mars, while the Ares 2 crew were on their way home. The most important piece of the advanced supplies, of course, was the MAV, the Mars Ascent Vehicle. That's how we would get back to Hermes after surface operations were complete. The MAV was soft-landed, as opposed to the balloon bounce fest the other supplies had. Of course, it was in constant communication with Houston, and if there had been any problems with it, we would have passed by Mars and gone home without ever landing. The MAV is pretty cool. Turns out, through a neat set of chemical reactions with the Martian atmosphere, for every kilogram of hydrogen you bring to Mars, you can make 13 kilograms of fuel. It's a slow process, though. It takes 24 months to fill the tank. That's why they sent it long before we got here. You can imagine how disappointed I was when I discovered the MAV was gone. It was a ridiculous sequence of events that led to me almost dying, and an even more ridiculous sequence that led to me surviving. The mission is designed to handle sandstorm gusts up to 150 kilometers per hour. So Houston got understandably nervous when we got whacked with 175 kilometer per hour winds. We all got in our flight spacesuits and huddled in the middle of the hab just in case it lost pressure. But the hab wasn't the problem. The MAV is a spaceship. It has a lot of delicate parts. It can put up with storms to a certain extent, but it can't just get sandblasted forever. After an hour and a half of sustained wind, NASA gave the order to abort. Nobody wanted to stop a month-long mission after only 6 days, but if the MAV took any more punishment, we'd all have gotten stranded down there. We had to go out in the storm to get from the hab to the MAV. That was going to be risky, but what choice did we have? Everyone made it but me. Our main communications dish, which relayed signals from the hab to Hermes, acted like a parachute, getting torn from its foundation and carried along with the torrent. Along the way, it crashed through the reception antenna array. Then one of those long, thin antennae slammed into me end first. It tore through my suit like a bullet through butter, and I felt the worst pain in my life as it ripped open my side. I vaguely remember having the wind knocked out of me, pulled out of me, really, and my ears popping painfully as the pressure of my suit escaped. The last thing I remember was seeing Johansson hopelessly reaching out toward me. I awoke to the oxygen alarm in my suit, a steady, obnoxious beeping that eventually roused me from a deep and profound desire to die. The storm had abated. I was face down, almost totally buried in sand. As I groggily came to, I wondered why I wasn't more dead. The antenna had enough force to punch through the suit and my side, but it had been stopped by my pelvis, so there was only one hole in the suit, and a hole in me, of course. I'd been knocked back quite a ways and rolled down a steep hill. Somehow, I landed face down, which forced the antenna into a strongly oblique angle that put a lot of torque on the hole in the suit. It made a weak seal. Then, the copious blood from my wound trickled down toward the hole. As the blood reached the site of the breach, the water in it quickly evaporated from the airflow and low pressure, leaving a gunky residue behind. More blood came in and was also reduced to gunk. Eventually, it sealed the gaps around the hole and reduced the leak to something the suit could counteract. The suit did its job admirably. Sensing the drop in pressure, it constantly flooded itself with air from my nitrogen tank to equalize. Once the leak became manageable, it only had to trickle new air in slowly to relieve the air lost. After a while, the CO2, carbon dioxide, absorbers in the suit were expended. That's really the limiting factor to life support. Not the amount of oxygen you bring with you, but the amount of CO2 you can remove. In the hab, I have the oxygenator, a large piece of equipment that breaks apart CO2 to give the oxygen back. But the spacesuits have to be portable, so they use a simple chemical absorption process with expendable filters. I'd been asleep long enough that my filters were now useless. The suit saw this problem and moved into an emergency mode the engineers call bloodletting. Having no way to separate out the CO2, the suit deliberately vented air to the Martian atmosphere, then backfilled with nitrogen. Between the breach and the bloodletting, it quickly ran out of nitrogen. All it had left was my oxygen tank. So it did the only thing it could to keep me alive. It started backfilling with pure oxygen. I now risked dying from oxygen toxicity, as the excessively high amount of oxygen threatened to burn up my nervous system, lungs, and eyes. An ironic death for someone with a leaky spacesuit, too much oxygen. Every step of the way would have had beeping alarms, alerts, and warnings, but it was the high oxygen warning that woke me. The sheer volume of training for a space mission is astounding. I spent a week back on Earth practicing emergency spacesuit drills. I knew what to do. Carefully reaching to the side of my helmet, I got the breach kit. It's nothing more than a funnel with a valve at the small end and an unbelievably sticky resin at the wide end. The idea is you have the valve open and stick the wide end over a hole. The air can escape through the valve, so it doesn't interfere with the resin, making a good seal. Then you close the valve and you've sealed the breach. The tricky part was getting the antenna out of the way. I pulled it out as fast as I could, wincing as the sudden pressure drop dizzied me and made the wound in my side scream in agony. I got the breach kit over the hole and sealed it. It held. The suit backfilled the missing air with yet more oxygen. Checking my arm readouts, I saw the suit was now at 85% oxygen. For reference, Earth's atmosphere is about 21%. I'd be okay, so long as I didn't spend too much time like that. I stumbled up the hill back toward the hab. As I crested the rise, I saw something that made me very happy and something that made me very sad. The hab was intact. Yay! Then the MAV was gone. Boo. Right that moment, I knew I was screwed, but I didn't want to just die out on the surface. I limped back into the hab and fumbled my way into an airlock. As soon as it equalized, I threw off my helmet. Once inside the hab, I doffed the suit and got my first good look at the injury. It would need stitches. Fortunately, all of us had been trained in basic medical procedures, and the hab had excellent medical supplies. A quick shot of local anesthetic, irrigate the wound, 9 stitches, and I was done. I'd be taking antibiotics for a couple of weeks, but other than that, I'd be fine. I knew it was hopeless, but I tried firing up the communications array. No signal, of course. The primary satellite dish had broken off, remember? And it took the reception antennae with it. The hab had secondary and tertiary communication systems, but they were both just for talking to the MAV, which would use its much more powerful systems to relay to Hermes. The thing is, that only works if the MAV is still around. I had no way to talk to Hermes. In time, I could locate the dish out on the surface, but it would take weeks for me to rig up any repairs, and then it would be too late. In an abort, Hermes would leave orbit within 24 hours. The orbital dynamics made the trip safer and shorter the earlier you left, so why wait? Checking out my suit, I saw the antenna had plowed through my biomonitor computer. When on an EVA, all the crew's suits are networked so we can see each other's status. The rest of the crew would have seen the pressure in my suit drop to nearly zero, followed immediately by my biosigns going flat. Add to that, watching me tumble down a hill with a spear through me in the middle of a sandstorm, yeah, they thought I was dead. How could they not? They may have even had a brief discussion about recovering my body, but regulations are clear. In the event a crewman dies on Mars, he stays on Mars. Leaving his body behind reduces weight for the MAV on the trip back. That means more disposable fuel and a larger margin of error for the return thrust. No point in giving that up for sentimentality. So that's the situation. I'm stranded on Mars. I have no way to communicate with Hermes or Earth. Everyone thinks I'm dead. I'm in a hab designed to last 31 days. If the oxygenator breaks down, I'll suffocate. If the water reclaimer breaks down, I'll die of thirst. If the hab breaches, I'll just kind of explode. If none of those things happen, I'll eventually run out of food and starve to death. So yeah, I'm screwed. So that's chapter 1. I guess I'll take questions now. Anyone?
At the time you wrote chapter 1, did you know what your conclusion would be?
I knew roughly what I wanted to have happen at the end, but it was really just a broad strokes idea. Mostly I just kind of made stuff up as I went along.
When I was a kid, my favorite movie was Robinson on Mars. Did you ever see that movie? Did that influence you at all?
I saw the movie, but I wouldn't say it was an influence for The Martian. So for those of you who didn't hear, she asked if Robinson Crusoe on Mars was an influence. No, a bigger influence for The Martian was really Apollo 13, the movie. That was what I was really like trying to recapture the feeling of. But yes, I have seen Robinson Crusoe on Mars. Of course, Mars was pretty crowded in that movie. There was Robinson Crusoe, there was Friday, who was just this dude who was there. There was a bunch of other slaves. Then there were aliens who were moving slaves around. There was a monkey. And, of course, because it's a 50s sci-fi movie, and you could take little red pills to supply you with all the oxygen you needed, and other than that, you didn't need a spacesuit. So it's kind of a different genre. Anyone?
Over here.
Sure, yeah.
Why did you decide to write it in the first person rather than the third person?
Actually, so the part I just read was a log entry. So that's Mark's log entry that he had entered. The book is technically third person. You see his log entries, and there are large segments that take place at NASA and aboard Hermes, and those are all told third person. The main reason I went with the log entry thing was he's alone on Mars, so unless he talks to himself, everything would be pure narration, and that would get a little dull. You wouldn't get a feel for his personality. Also, there's a lot of technical stuff to explain, and so if I have a really kind of funny, smart alecky guy explaining things, then I can make that more interesting to kind of convey that information to the reader.
Yeah, there were a few teachers in my life who were very influential. I'm wondering if there were some teachers that might even be recognizable to people in this room. I'm not serious. Were there teachers who were influential and are any of them here?
Well, there's Mrs. Cox right there. Great jacket. She was my 10th grade geometry teacher, and I immediately recognized her when she came in. I'm like, oh, wow. So that was pretty neat to see her. Also, one of her colleagues, Mr. Fong, Nelson Fong, at Livermore High. He had a big effect. He was a trigonometry and calculus teacher, and well, it helps that I was really, really into those subjects, but yeah, he had an effect on me.
What helped you come up with pirate ninjas for...
Pirate ninjas. In the book, so I had to come up with this thing. In the book, he talks a lot about kilowatt hours per sol. So he can generate power with his solar cells, and that generates like a certain number of kilowatt hours per day, per sol, because a Martian day is a sol. Now, technically, if you do unit analysis on kilowatt hours per sol, it's a power. So you could just as easily say watts. But what really mattered to him is the total amount of energy that he creates in specifically a day, a Martian day, a sol. So what was cool is I went, about a month ago, I went to JPL, and I got to tour their facility, and I gave a talk there. And they mentioned that this is actually something that they talk in watt hours per sol, not kilowatt hours, but watt hours per sol a lot because of the Mars probes. They have to, they have an energy budget they can use per sol, and they're generating energy either with an RTG or with solar cells. And so they said we might just start calling that millipirate ninjas. A watt hour per sol. So it's in the back.
What scientific authors influenced
Scientific authors. Well, if you're
Science fiction.
oh, science fiction. Yes, definitely the old classics: Heinlein, Asimov, and Clarke. My dad, seated right there, had this huge bookshelf full of 1 metric infinity of old, like paperback sci-fi novels from his youth and from the 50s all the way up into the 80s, which is when this was happening. And I would just read them. I'd read one, read the next, read the next. So I was really heavily influenced by those kind of classic, I guess, juvenile sci-fis, as they're called. Yep.
Did you participate in the screenplay?
Well, I was advised. They talked back and forth with me on the screenplay a lot, but they didn't have to. Like, they just chose to. I have no clout or no say. My only job in the movie is to cash the check. But Drew Goddard wrote the screenplay. He wrote, he wrote the adaptation. Drew Goddard directed Cabin in the Woods, and he wrote Cloverfield, and he wrote a bunch of episodes of Lost and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. He wrote what I think is a great screenplay. I think it's great because he followed the book pretty well. He would go back and forth with me and ask, my opinion on things. Now, as I said, I have no clout and no actual power, so it's just, if they choose to listen to what I have to say, that's up to them. They did ask me to go through the script with a fine-tooth comb to make sure all the science was accurate. And so I pointed out some errors there. She in the back's been waiting a while. Yeah.
How did you do all the technical research for your book? Did you meet up with NASA or on the internet?
No, just internet research, just sitting down and Googling for what I wanted to know. I had a pretty firm foundation in the basics of this stuff because it's been a lifelong interest of mine, space and the space industry and all that. So, I'm pretty good on basic physics. I'm really weak on chemistry, actually. So that was the stuff that I got wrong most often in the book that my readers were like, wrong. But I had no contacts in aerospace at all, really, until after the book came out. And after that, then I started getting emails, and I've got all sorts of people I can talk to about this stuff. But no, it was just mostly me researching by myself and reader feedback from the chapters that I posted.
Yeah, I'm assuming you've been following the landing of Philae.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
Think there's a way that your Martian can come up with a way for Philae to save itself?
I'm 100% positive that the giant room full of scientists at ESA are smarter than I am. So I don't think there's anything I'm going to think of that they won't. Yeah.
A two-part question. Mark Watney I've loved the character.
Thanks.
He's so positive, even in the Job type situation where everything's going to fail, everything continues to fail. It's one, but
Job.
see that happen. There's a segment where you actually have a NASA psychologist talking about the mental state of the different aspects. Did you talk to anybody about that? And the second part is, are they going to keep that same type of character in the film?
The answer to the first part is no. I just kind of decided that would be an interesting scene. I don't know if any of the stuff I said in that scene is valid to real psychologists or psychiatrists at all. Seems reasonable though. And that's the point. As a writer, I don't have to be right. I just have to make you think I'm right. As for the film, the tone of the script is it does seem to follow that, or at least the version of the script I saw. A screenplay can change. It's a very fluid process. I'm learning as I'm watching the sausage get made on the film. They can change things right up to the minute before they film them. Because if all you want to change is dialogue, that's easy. You just tell the actors, okay, say this dialogue instead. So, but what I get when I'm hearing from the screenplay writer, who's Drew, who's watching the process, and the producer, whose name is Aditya Sood, and he's been keeping me up to date too, just not because they have to, just because they'd like to, is that they're definitely going for the lighthearted. There's a lot of funny stuff, so far so good on that.
in relation to that, so is Matt Damon would be your first choice to play Mark Watney? Or?
Well, now I'm going to say that, yeah.
So who's your second?
There are any number of actors who would do a great job. I think Bradley Cooper would probably do a good job. He does a smart alecky attitude really well, from The Hangover, that sort of stuff. I also think Chris Pratt, who was in Guardians of the Galaxy as Star-Lord, that attitude, that kind of smug, yeah, I don't know. I think they could pull it off. Yep. Yeah.
Did you have someone in mind, when you were writing it?
No, I didn't even have a physical, real image of Mark Watney when I was writing it. If you'd asked me, like, even if you ask me now, I can't tell you, like, what I imagine his hair color as. He's just like a guy. Who's like, What's funny is I didn't picture any of them, except for I had an image in my mind of what Commander Lewis looked like. And I imagine Commander Lewis is looking like Jane Lynch. I don't know why my mind decided that, but she's supposed to be in her, late 40s or to mid 50s somewhere. I imagined her with short cropped white hair. Remember, she's a career Navy officer. She's risen through the ranks, and she's in charge of a Mars mission. And so I imagined this kind of like tough, no nonsense older lady, and she was being played by Jessica Chastain, who is like a young, beautiful woman. I don't think anyone will complain about that, but anyone else? Yeah.
So will there be a sequel?
No, I don't have any ideas for a sequel. I mean, I honestly can't think of anything that doesn't really strain plausibility, right? Yeah.
It's such a thrilling, inspiring book. I really wish it could be aimed at a little bit younger audience than is possible. You did a great job of cleaning it
Substitute.
up. Yeah, could we just have a younger version out that starts kids on the path?
You are not the first to point that out. Numerous parties. So first off, bear in mind, I don't own the copyright on this. Random House does, so I don't make those decisions. Random House, and all publishers actually, they really hate having multiple versions of a book out. It's an accounting and a management nightmare. When a bookstore says, I want to order 20 copies of The Martian, they have to go like, well, okay, we have 2 different flavors of The Martian, and they don't want to deal with that. So they will almost never make alternate versions. Pretty much the only time that you'll see a book that has alternate versions is when it's actually specifically created for a school, and then they also have a teacher's edition, right? But other than that, so I think that probably won't happen. So yeah, sorry, but yeah. Yeah.
I just have a comment. I have 11 and 13-year-olds, and it was the first book I let them read was Bad Bird.
Oh, great. I'm glad I could help indoctrinate them into the world of profanities.
They didn't focus on that. They just loved the book.
Great. I'm glad they liked it. You.
How much writing did you do before you
About 300 pages. I was writing pretty much all the time, either short stories or attempts at novels and stuff, even all the way back into my teenage years. The Martian is actually the 3rd complete novel I've written. The second one was okay, but it would need heavy revisions to be, to remotely have a chance. And by the way, Random House does not just rubber stamp me. Like after The Martian, they're like, great, now we want to know what your idea for your next book is. And I'm like, here it is. I just put like a month of research into carefully crafting this world. They're like, yeah, we don't like it. So I'm like, well, here's this other thing. They're like, okay, that one will do. So they won't just rubber stamp me. The second book I wrote, the one that when I was in my late 20s that I tried to get published and stuff, that one was clumsy. It had a decent plot, but clumsily written. It just wasn't good wordsmithing. And then the first book was really bad. That's your first pancake, right? And I am glad that I completed that before the era of the internet really took hold. So there are no digital copies out there. No one will ever see it. But I've written a lot of short stories, and right around the time I was starting to write The Martian, it took me 3 years to write The Martian. Right around the time I was starting to write The Martian, I wrote a short story called The Egg that was really popular, and it made the rounds. I see a few heads nodding. You've seen that. And that actually was probably instrumental in getting me a bunch of regular readers to the site who then read The Martian. So that was pretty cool. Yeah?
I learned of your book from my wife who heard an episode in NPR.
Yeah?
Or they were talking about it, and after waiting a week and a half here at the library and putting it on hold, I finally got a copy of it last Monday, and I love the book, and you're a fabulous author. I sucked it up in 2 days.
Oh, thanks, I'm glad you liked it.
One of the questions that I wanted to ask you, there's many very humorous places in this book, as a lot of folks know, but one of the questions I wanted to ask you was the little ditty about duct tape.
Duct tape, yeah. No, I think the line is, of course duct tape works in a vacuum, duct tape works everywhere, duct tape is magical and should be worshipped. You're wondering if that's true?
No, that's what I asked.
Yeah. Yes, it does work in a vacuum, and it actually was instrumental in I think the Apollo 15 mission. On the lunar rover, they had a fender, the right rear fender on the rover broke off and just fell off and was broken and irreparable. And they're like, well, not the end of the world. Well, there's a reason the fender's there, because as they're driving, then the wheel just started spraying regolith at them, so they're just getting pelted, and they're like, well, this doesn't work. So they ripped the cover off of the surface mission manual and taped it in place where the fender had broken, and so they made their own makeshift fender out of duct tape on the moon. So that's a real thing. Yeah, duct tape. What? Duct tape is it's the force, right? Duct tape is the force. It has a light side and a dark side, and it binds everything together. Yeah. I didn't make that joke up. Yeah.
Why did you decide to make the commander a woman?
I never had it in mind for it to be anything other than a woman. I guess I guess that's just what popped in my head, and I'm like, okay, we'll do that. I actually went for a while. I considered when I was about a third of the way up until I was about a third of the way through. I considered, well, I could go back and make Mark a woman. Like I considered making Mark a woman, but then I realized that it would just be kind of like she'd just be a woman who acts like a man a lot. So I don't know. I kind of chose the genders randomly, I'll admit. Like, yeah, Commander Lewis is actually like my favorite not Mark character in the book. I don't know how to, I'm a writer, me no good with words. So, yeah, in the back.
When in the process did you come up with the title? Like, was that one of the first steps, or did it kind of come later?
It came a little bit later. Actually, it was, and I think this happens a lot, it was a working title, and it's still the title. I guess, you can see the not so subtle symbolism there. He lives on Mars, therefore he's the Martian. Yeah, I just, it was sort of like just what I named it for the time being, and then I had a few thousand readers reading it regularly, and it would have been inconvenient to change it. So that's what it ended up being called. Yeah.
Why the Beatles?
The Beatles? You mean why disco, or? Okay, so, well, there is actually a short, there is actually a thing in there in the book where Johansson's data stuff has like some Beatles albums on it. But for the most part, he wasn't listening to Beatles, he was listening to disco. Commander Lewis's inexhaustible supply of disco. And I just did that to be a running gag, just to be funny here and there. And he complains about it, but yeah, there is a scene where he had access to the Beatles, but he stuck with the disco. So you can infer from that his personality how you like.
I assume that when you were writing, you had a phase where you weren't sure if you were going to have him live or not.
No, I never. I always knew how I wanted it to end. Yeah.
Because I was wondering how you would have killed him.
Well, that wouldn't have been hard.
Did you have any input into the artwork on the cover?
Yes, I did. They ran it by me, and they said, "Hey, this is going to be the cover." And I said, "I don't like it." The original version was more, yeah, okay. So there was more like pixelated, like little squares of stuff. And it was pretty much the same picture, but the dust in it was more artsy. It was more like little squares and stuff. And I'm like, I don't like the artsy stuff mixed with photorealism. I don't think it looks good. I imagined So every regional area gets to make their own cover. So like the British cover is different than the US cover, and also all the language translations, they each have their own cover. The simplified Chinese version just has a big picture of Mars. The Dutch version has kind of what I really liked, which is it just shows like Martian terrain and scenery, and then a lone astronaut off in the distance walking. And I thought that was really cool. I thought that was really cool. This one, yeah, I didn't like it. I don't like the photorealism, or at least at the time they showed it to me. And also, when they first showed it to me, in the astronaut's helmet, which because they've taken, that's a real photo of an astronaut, you could see the space shuttle's cargo bay in the reflection. So I pointed that out at least, and they removed that. But it's good that they didn't listen to me, because everybody really likes the cover, or most people do. There are websites that literally judge books by their cover. You can think of them as like an artistic analysis website where they say like, we're going to talk about book covers. And remember, the cover of a book is like a marketing decision. It's a big deal. It's what draws people in. And those sites all seem to really like it. So I'm in the minority, so it's just as well that I didn't have like veto power.
So November is National Novel Writing Month.
That's my job.
So advice for aspiring writers.
Yeah, so my advice is write. I know that sounds trite, but it's very easy to come up with a story and think of all the details and think about how awesome it'll be. But until you actually write it, it's just a daydream. And when you actually write it, that's when you start running into the problems with your story. You say like, oh, this will be so awesome, this will be so awesome, but then you realize kind of as you're starting to write it, you're like, oh, I see, this will take too long to describe and it's boring, or there's a huge pothole, or why didn't the protagonist just do this, which would have been so much simpler for him. So, yeah, and I would even say that no concept survives first contact with implementation. You start writing, and that's when it starts becoming a real story. And the hardest thing, and I'm guilty of violating this rule all the time, is resist the urge to tell your friends and family your story ideas, because it satisfies your need for an audience and reduces your desire to actually write it. So if you have to, if you know that the only way for anyone to see this story idea is for you to write it and then them to read it, then it's a much better motivator. So that would be my advice.
Did you have any involvement in the audio version and selection of the narrator?
No, but the narrator's great. His name is R.C. Bray. The audio version was done by a company called Podium, and they just did a really good job. The narrator, he's a veteran though, it's not a surprise. I mean, he's narrated like 100 audiobooks, so but I think they did a really great job. Interestingly, if you buy it right now, the version you get is like, they actually re-recorded the whole thing, because my version that I posted of The Martian, when I posted it myself to Kindle, after Random House got it, they wanted some changes. We went through an editorial pass. Nothing really big, but changes here and there, make this less clumsy, add some more information here, and so on. Then the Podium guys are like, well, we don't like that our version doesn't exactly match word for word the novel, so they re-recorded it. And so in the second version, which is good. So how many of you know what ASCII is? Yeah, okay. So there's a reference in the book to ASCII. They use ASCII for things. And in the audiobook version, they pronounced it ASC2. Because that's what it looks like, right? And so when they re-recorded it, they fixed that.
Fix the German pronunciation.
Oh, they didn't? Okay. Sehr gefährlich, yeah.
All right, final questions, because I know Andy's going to be signing a lot of copies of books, so maybe final questions.
Okay, final questions?
Go ahead.
So can you give us a little sneak peek on what you're working on now?
Yeah, what I'm working on now is a much more traditional sci-fi book. It's less rigidly technical than The Martian. It's just a good old-fashioned, there are aliens and stuff going on, and so it's like that. I don't want to give too much away because I don't know exactly all the directions I'm going to go with the plot, so I don't want to commit to anything. Anyone else? Going. All right.
Are you
you going to stay strictly within this genre, or are you going to try different areas?
I don't imagine needing science fiction. I have a few like fantasy ideas. I've actually got an interesting crime fiction idea I might want to try sometime about. It's basically a heist story, but I've got to establish myself first. So, you know, maybe if I'm firmly established as a science fiction author, then I can start dabbling elsewhere. All right. Okay.